born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, but the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free? Muguland, Muguland. We're crying out for change, but they shoot us on the streets. Muguland, Muguland. We have all it takes to be great, but only corruption is great in the land. They say no money's left, but the rich keep getting fat. Their wrists shine with diamonds, private jets, imagine that.
The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the bustling streets of Alaye city. As darkness crept across the metropolis, the familiar symphony of honking horns and street vendors' calls was shattered by the sharp, menacing sound of gunfire. The echoes reverberated through the narrow alleys and wide boulevards, a chilling sign that something terrible had happened. Meanwhile, in the affluent neighborhood of Kokuyi, far from the chaos of the streets, a group of powerful men gathered around a massive mahogany table in a luxurious mansion. These were the Kingmakers of Muguland, the shadowy figures who pulled the strings of the nation's political machinery. Tonight, they had convened to decide the fate of one of their own. At the head of the table sat Chief Bisola Eleniyan, a man whose ascent to power had been as swift as it was mysterious. His thick-framed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, obscuring eyes that many believed could see straight into a man's soul. The tension in the room was palpable, each man's face a mask of steely resolve, but their eyes betrayed the fear that lurked just beneath the surface. The only sound was the occasional click of a lighter as someone lit a cigarette, adding to the haze of smoke that hung in the air. Suddenly, the double doors at the far end of the room burst open, and a man staggered in, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining the rumpled white of his shirt. The men at the table leapt to their feet, their chairs scraping loudly against the polished marble floor.
Bogunlo is dead, the man gasped before collapsing to the ground.
A collective gasp filled the room as people absorbed the shocking news that Williams Bogunlo, the charismatic politician who had once posed a serious threat to Chief Bisola Eleniyan's carefully constructed empire, was dead. The implications were as clear as the blood now pooling around the fallen man. Chief Bisola Eleniyan remained seated, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of the men who had, until moments ago, considered themselves untouchable.
It begins, the price of power.
As the men exchanged glances, one of the bolder members of the group finally spoke up.
Chief, did you order this?
Eleniyan's eyes narrowed.
You think I would do something so reckless? This wasn't my doing. I need to know who did this. Find out now.
Chief Eleniyan's expression turned somber as he sat back down, contemplating the implications. He knew people would blame him. They always did. After all, Bogunlo was his biggest rival. But Eleniyan genuinely had nothing to do with this. Yet he also knew that bearing the weight of such accusations was part of the price of power, and he was prepared to pay it. Eleniyan's expression remained inscrutable, but a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, passed through his eyes. He knew that no matter what he said, no matter how he protested his innocence, the blame would fall on him. Bogunlo was his biggest rival, and in the eyes of the people, that made him the prime suspect. As his people kept looking at each other in shock and confusion at the unexpected development, Chief Eleniyan sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. He knew that in the world of Mugulandian politics, truth was often irrelevant. Perception was everything, and the perception now was that he was a killer. It was an accusation he would have to weather, a storm he would have to endure. He had chosen this path, and he was prepared to face its consequences. Outside, Alaye City roared in response to the news. Protests erupted spontaneously as rumors of Bogunlo's assassination spread like wildfire. The streets were flooded with people demanding justice, their cries echoing off the walls of the city that had given birth to so many broken dreams.
Justice for Bogunlo. We demand justice.
But above the chaos, like a shadow looming over the land, was the figure of Chief Bisola Eleniyan, a man who had mastered the art of political survival and who knew that tonight was just the opening move in a much larger, bloodier game. As night fell, Chief Bisola Eleniyan returned to his seat, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the table. He had climbed too high, seen too much, to be afraid now.
My enemies will come for me, as they always have, but this time, I am ready. I will not just survive, I will dominate.
Outside, the gunfire continued, a stark reminder that in the world of Mugulandian politics, power was not simply earned, it was seized, manipulated, and often paid for in blood. And tonight, Chief Bisola Eleniyan was prepared to pay that price.
The rain pounded relentlessly against the tin roof of the small room in Mushin, a rhythmic drumming that seemed to mirror the chaotic thoughts racing through Dauda Omolomo's mind. He sat hunched over a weathered wooden table, staring intently at the worn passport in front of him. The photograph inside belonged to a young woman, her face framed by tight curls and her eyes wide with the innocence of youth. The name beside the picture read Bisola Eleniyan. Dauda's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears like a war drum. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The room felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as the weight of his decision pressed down on him. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and desperation, mingling with the sharp tang of sweat that clung to his skin. He picked up the passport, his fingers trembling slightly. It was not fear that made him shake, but the gravity of what he was about to do. The path he was about to take was one from which there would be no return. But Dauda had long since resigned himself to the fact that the life he was born into could not be the life he lived. Not if he wanted to survive. Not if he wanted to thrive. His gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where a small shrine had been hastily erected. At its center was a photograph of the real Bisola Eleniyan, the daughter of his political mentor, Chief Bisola Eleniyan. She had been the apple of her father's eye, a bright and promising student with a future as luminous as the morning sun. But fate had other plans. A sudden and mysterious illness had struck her down in the prime of her life, leaving Chief Eleniyan devastated. It was in the aftermath of her death that Dauda had first conceived his audacious plan. He had been close to the chief, who had seen potential in the young man and taken him under his wing, but with Bisola gone, Dauda knew that his position was precarious. He needed a way out, a way to ensure his survival and to seize the opportunities that Alaye City could no longer offer him. She was too good for this world, Chief Eleniyan had once said, his voice thick with grief as he stared into the distance. She was going to change the world, Dauda, but now the world is a little darker without her. Dauda had nodded silently, offering what little comfort he could, but even as he did, his mind was working furiously, plotting a way to use the situation to his advantage. He saw an opportunity where others saw only tragedy. One night, as the chief lay drunk and weeping over the loss of his daughter, Dauda had quietly slipped into Bisola's room. There, among the remnants of her life, he found her passport. The resemblance was faint but unmistakable, enough to pass for siblings, perhaps even close family. With the right story, Dauda could make it work. And in that moment, Dauda Omolomo, an unremarkable man born in Yamoja City, in faraway Nuso State to unremarkable parents, died. And the legend of the man later to be known globally as Chief Bisola Eleniyan was born. He was no longer the son of a struggling market woman, doomed to a life of mediocrity. He was now the child of a respected political figure, a man with connections and influence, a man who could open doors that had always been slammed shut in Dauda's face. His decision made, Dauda Omolomo, now determined to legitimize himself as the reincarnated Bisola Eleniyan, had approached the chief with a plan. "Chief, I need your help," Dauda said, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his mind. "I want to honor Bisola's memory by continuing her education in the United States. I have been accepted into a program there, but I need your support to make it happen." Chief Eleniyan had looked at him with bleary eyes, clouded by both alcohol and grief. "You want to go in her place?" he had asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "Yes, Chief," Dauda had replied. I want to carry on her legacy, to fulfill the dreams she could not. I want to make you proud, just as she would have. The chief had stared at him for a long moment, and for a terrifying second, Bisola thought his plan had failed. But then the old man had nodded, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. She would have wanted that, Chief Eleniyan had whispered. She would have wanted you to succeed where she could not. And with that, Dauda had secured his passage out of Alaya City and into a new life as a man reborn, or more appropriately as a woman reborn, with the Bisola Eleniyan identity and the full permission of the man who had given his now deceased daughter that name. The documents were prepared, the funds transferred, and before long the new Bisola Eleniyan was boarding a plane bound for the United States. The city that had given him life had now given him a new identity, a new purpose, and a new path to power. As the plane took off, leaving Alaya City behind, Bisola leaned back in his seat, a small smile playing on his lips. The game had begun, and he was more than ready to play. "I will surely come back someday," he whispered to himself, the roar of the engines drowning out his words, "but not until I have everything to be somebody in this land." The clouds parted below, revealing the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Beyond it lay the future he had stolen, the future he would make his own. In that moment, Bisola Eleniyan was no longer just a man. He was an idea, a force that would stop at nothing to claim what he believed was rightfully his. And nothing, not even the memory of the real Bisola Eleniyan, would stand in his way.
The wind whipped through the streets, biting and cold, as Bisola Eleniyan, formerly known as Dauda Omolomo, navigated the vast, unfamiliar cityscape. The towering buildings, bustling crowds, and electric energy of the city both thrilled and overwhelmed him. He had left Alaya City with a singular mission: to succeed at all costs. But the path he found himself on in America was far different, and far more dangerous than anything he had ever imagined. In the early days of his life in the United States, Bisola struggled to find his footing. The money that Chief Bisola Eleniyan had provided only went so far, and soon the harsh realities of immigrant life set in. He juggled odd jobs, barely managing to cover his tuition and living expenses. The American dream, it seemed, was more elusive than he had anticipated. But then, Bisola met Ada Oloja, a smooth-talking Mugulandian who seemed to embody everything Bisola had dreamed of. Ade was polished, wealthy, and well-connected. He exuded an air of danger and unpredictability that both intrigued and unsettled Bisola. "You want to make it here, my friend?" Ade had asked one night as they sat in a dimly lit bar, the sound of jazz music filling the air. "You need more than just hard work. You need connections. You need to understand how this city operates." Bisola listened intently, his eyes narrowing as Ade spoke. There was something captivating about the man, something that made him feel as though the impossible was within reach. "What kind of connections?" Bisola asked cautiously, sensing that this conversation was leading him down a path he hadn't intended to take. Ade leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The kind that can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams, my friend. The kind that can take you from struggling student to someone who commands respect." The allure of quick wealth and power was impossible to resist, and Bisola soon found himself drawn into a world of drug trafficking and money laundering. Ade introduced him to a network of Mugulandians who had established themselves as key players in the heroin trade that stretched from West Africa to the streets of Alaya City. It was a dangerous game, but one that promised rewards beyond Bisola's wildest dreams. At first, Bisola was hesitant. He had come to America to study, to build a future through legitimate means. But as the pressures mounted, the bills piling up, the constant threat of deportation looming over him, he found himself increasingly tempted by the allure of easy money. "I don't know, Ade," Bisola had said one night as they sat in Ade's luxurious penthouse overlooking the city. "This isn't what I came here for." Ade had laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed off the walls. "You think the men at the top care how they got there? You think that they're all saints doing everything by the book? No, my friend. The world is built by those who take risks. You want to be a king, don't you? Then you have to be willing to play the game, and play the game Bisola did. He started small, running errands for Ade and his associates, handling money transfers and acting as a middleman in transactions. But as he proved himself reliable and discreet, his role within the network grew. He began to oversee larger operations, managing the flow of money through accounts he had set up under various aliases. It was during this time that Bisola decided to fully embrace his new identity. One evening, after a particularly lucrative transaction, Bisola found himself alone with Aid in the penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of stars. Bisola took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation he'd been rehearsing in his mind for days. "Aid, there's something I need to tell you," Bisola began, his voice steady but laced with tension. "I'm not Dauda Omolomo anymore. That name is dead to me." Aid raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? And who are you now?" Bisola met his gaze, his eyes cold and resolute. "I'm Bisola Eleniyan. That's the name I want to be known by. It's the name I'm going to build my empire under." Aid studied him for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Bisola Eleniyan, eh? Sounds powerful, but why the change?" "Dauda Omolomo was the name of a nobody," Bisola replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. "A name tied to a past I'm leaving behind. Bisola Eleniyan is a name with a future, a name with connections. It's a name that commands respect." Aid nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And what about your past, Bisola? You can't just erase it." "I can and I will," Bisola said, his jaw set with determination. "I've already started. I've destroyed every document that could link me to Dauda. I've contacted people back home, people who know how to make things disappear. Soon there won't be a single trace of Dauda Omolomo left." Aid leaned back in his chair, a look of admiration on his face. "You've thought this through, haven't you? I have to say, Bisola Eleniyan has a nice ring to it. It suits you." Bisola allowed himself a small smile. "From now on, that's who I am, and I won't allow anything or anyone to get in the way of that." Aid raised his glass in a toast to Bisola Eleniyan. "May he rise to the top and take everything he desires." They clinked glasses, the sound of the toast echoing through the penthouse. But even as they celebrated, Bisola's mind was already racing ahead, plotting his next move. The transformation from Dauda Omolomo to Bisola Eleniyan was more than just a change of name. It was a rebirth, a shedding of an old identity that no longer served him. Bisola was determined to build a new life, one where he was not just a player in the game of power, but the one calling the shots. As he walked out of Aid's penthouse that night, the cold wind biting at his face, Bisola knew that he had crossed a line, one that he could never return from, but he didn't look back. The path ahead was clear, and it was one that only Bisola Eleniyan could walk. The next day, Bisola made his final move to erase Dauda Omolomo from existence. He visited the offices of a shady private investigator who specialized in cleaning up records. With a substantial payment, Bisola ensured that all traces of Dauda Omolomo's existence, birth records, school transcripts, even immigration documents, were expunged, altered, or buried so deep that no one would ever find them. "Consider it done," the investigator had said, pocketing the envelope of cash Bisola had handed him. "From now on, you're Bisola Eleniyan. As far as anyone's concerned, Dauda Omolomo never existed." As Bisola left the office, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was no longer tied to the past, no longer burdened by the identity of a man who was destined for mediocrity. Bisola Eleniyan was a name that would be known, feared, and respected, and he would stop at nothing to ensure that it was. The city of Alaye City, with all its opportunities and dangers, had given Bisola the tools he needed to become who he was meant to be, but it was time to leave it behind. His true destiny awaited him in Alaye City. As the city faded into the distance, Bisola knew that the game was far from over. It was only just beginning, and this time he would play to win, no matter the cost.
Episode 3. The Drug Bust and the Narrow Escape. The clang of the cell door closing behind him echoed in Bisola Eleniyan's ears, reverberating through his bones. The sound was cold, final, and it sent a chill down his spine. He sat on the edge of the narrow cot, staring at the grey concrete walls that had become his world for the past few days. The sterile, suffocating air of the holding cell was a far cry from the luxurious penthouses and sleek offices where he had conducted his business. Bisola had always known the risks. In the back of his mind, he had been aware that the empire he was building was precariously perched on the edge of legality. But he had been careful, meticulous even, to stay just out of reach of the law, or so he thought. It had all unraveled so quickly. The early morning raid, the flash of badges, the harsh commands of the FBI agents as they stormed his apartment. Bisola had barely had time to register what was happening before he was cuffed and dragged into the back of a police car, his rights read to him in a cold monotone. The charges were severe: money laundering, conspiracy to distribute heroin, aiding and abetting a criminal enterprise. The words had fallen like a guillotine, cutting through any illusions Bisola might have harbored about his invincibility. He had been careful, but not careful enough. The authorities had been watching Akeem Oloja's network for months, building a case, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now they had their prize. A major player in the operation, someone who could give them the names and connections they needed to dismantle the entire organization. As Bisola sat in that cell, the weight of his predicament settled over him like a shroud. The prospect of spending the rest of his life in an American prison loomed large, suffocating him with its finality. The money, the power, the connections, they all meant nothing now. He was just another inmate, just another cog in the machine of the American justice system. The door to his cell creaked open, and a guard stepped in, nodding toward Bisola. "Your lawyer's here," he said, his tone devoid of any warmth or empathy. Bisola stood, his legs unsteady beneath him, and followed the guard down the narrow corridor to a small, windowless room. There, sitting at a metal table, was his lawyer, a man with a stern, weathered face, dressed in a crisp suit that seemed out of place in the drab surroundings. "Mr. Eleniyan," the lawyer greeted him, standing to shake his hand. "Please, have a seat." Bisola sat down, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them together on the table. The lawyer wasted no time, pulling out a folder and laying it on the table in front of him. "We have a problem," the lawyer said, his voice low and serious. "The government has built a solid case against you. They have records of your financial transactions, witness statements and surveillance footage. If this goes to trial, the chances of acquittal are slim." Bisola felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What are my options?" he asked, his voice strained. The lawyer hesitated for a moment, then opened the folder, revealing a stack of papers. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is willing to offer you a deal. It's not ideal, but it's the best we're going to get." Bisola's eyes narrowed as he looked at the documents. "A deal? A plea bargain?" the lawyer explained. "You plead guilty to a lesser charge of money laundering, and in exchange, the other charges are dropped. You forfeit the funds in your accounts, but you avoid a lengthy prison sentence." "How long?" Bisola asked, his heart pounding in his chest. "Time served," the lawyer replied, "plus probation. But you'll be free to go." The words hung in the air, almost surreal in their simplicity. Free to go. After everything, after all the risks he had taken, it seemed impossible that he could walk away from this with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. But the lawyer's expression was grave, his eyes sharp and calculating. "This is your best option, Mr. Eleniyan," the lawyer continued. "You take this deal, or you roll the dice in court. But I'm telling you now, if this goes to trial, the odds are not in your favor." Bisola's mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always been a gambler, willing to take risks for the promise of greater rewards. But this was different. This was his life, his freedom, hanging in the balance. He looked up at the lawyer, his expression hardening with resolve. "I'll take the deal." The lawyer nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "Good. I'll make the arrangements. You'll be out of here by the end of the week." As the lawyer gathered the papers, Bisola sat back in his chair, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had narrowly escaped a fate that could have destroyed him, but the cost was steep. The money he had worked so hard to amass was gone, forfeited to the US government. And with it, the empire he had begun to build in America had crumbled before it could even take shape. But as the initial shock faded, a new resolve began to take root in Bisola's mind. America had been a stepping stone, a place where he had learned the ropes, honed his skills and made connections. But it was never meant to be the end game. No. The end game was back in AI City, back in Muguland, where he could leverage everything he had learned to build something far greater. The name Bisola Eleniyan would not end in a prison cell. It would rise to new heights, more powerful than ever before. The following week, as Bisola stepped out of the courthouse, a free man, the cold wind of AI City biting at his face, he knew that this was a turning point. He had played with fire and had almost been burned, but he had survived. And now, with the lessons learned and the scars to prove it, he was ready to return to AI City and claim what was rightfully his. As he made his way through the bustling streets, the towering buildings of Seattle fading into the background, Bisola's mind was already racing ahead. He would return to Muguland, but he would do so as a different man. A man who had seen the worst the world had to offer, and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The game was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning, and this time, Bisola Eleniyan would play to win, no matter the cost.
The news of Chief Bisola Eleniyan's death swept through AI City like the Harmattan wind, dry and unrelenting. For decades, the chief had been a towering figure in the city's political landscape, a man whose influence stretched across the length and breadth of Muguland. To many, he was a father, a mentor, a kingmaker. To Bisola Eleniyan, he had been all that and more, a guiding hand, a protector, and the man who had given him a name and a purpose. The funeral rites were held in a grand yet austere manner befitting a man of Chief Eleniyan's stature and faith. The mosque was packed to the rafters with dignitaries, political elites, business magnates, and community leaders, all gathered to pay their respects. The air was thick with the solemn recitations of the Quran, the rhythmic cadence of the verses echoing through the sacred space as the chief imam of AI City led the prayers. Bisola sat among the mourners, his head bowed, his heart heavy. The loss of his mentor left a void that was as deep as it was unexpected. The chief had been the anchor in his life, the man who had helped him navigate the treacherous waters of AI City politics. Without him, Bisola knew he would need to be even more vigilant, even more ruthless if he was to survive and thrive in the cutthroat world he had chosen. After the prayers, the chief's body was carried out of the mosque, wrapped in simple white cloth, as per Islamic tradition. The burial was swift, dignified, and devoid of the extravagance that so often marked the passing of the powerful in Muguland. The simplicity of the ceremony only underscored the profound respect in which Chief Eleniyan was held. As the last shovelful of earth was placed on the grave, the mourners began to disperse, their faces solemn, their voices hushed. Bisola lingered, staring at the freshly turned soil, struggling to come to terms with the finality of it all. He was alone with his thoughts when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You're not alone, Bisola." The voice was soft yet commanding, a voice that Bisola had come to respect and fear. He turned to see Iyanla Eleniyan standing a few feet away, her regal presence impossible to ignore. Dressed in a flowing black abaya, her head wrapped in a matching hijab, she looked every inch the matron of AI City's most powerful family. "Iyanla," Bisola said, bowing his head in respect as she approached. I didn't expect to see you here alone." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cool calculation of someone who had seen and survived it all. "Chief may be gone, but I'm still here, and as long as I'm here, so are you." Bisola frowned slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Iyanla, what do you mean?" Iyanla Eleniyan stepped closer, her gaze piercing as she looked up at him. Despite her age, there was a strength in her eyes that Bisola found both reassuring and intimidating. "You've done well for yourself, Bisola, better than most would have in your position. But don't forget where you came from, and don't forget who helped you get where you are." Bisola felt a pang of unease. "Iyanla, I don't understand." She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she searched his face. "Let me make it clear for you, Bisola, all those dealings you had in Seattle, in Atlanta, all the way to Seattle, all the connections you made, Akimoloja, the money, the trade, they were mine." Bisola's eyes widened, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. "What? But how?" Iyanla's smile returned, this time tinged with something more sinister. "Akim Oloja was one of mine, just as you were. You thought you were building something on your own, but in reality you've been under my wing the entire time. I knew where you were, who you were meeting, and what deals you were making. It was all part of the plan." Bisola's mind reeled. The realization that he had been manipulated, that every move he'd made had been anticipated and orchestrated by the woman standing before him, was staggering. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to prove yourself, Iyanla replied, her tone unyielding. Chief saw potential in you, but I needed to see if you could survive on your own, if you could handle the pressure, the risks. You did, and you've done well. But now the Chief is gone, you answer to me. Bisola's shock began to morph into something else. Admiration, respect, and a growing sense of resolve. Iyanla, I didn't know. No, you didn't, she said, her voice softening slightly. But you know now. Chief may have given you the name, but I gave you the means. You've been working for me from the moment you set foot in Seattle, USA. Bisola swallowed hard, the gravity of her words sinking in. And what now, Iyanla? What do you expect from me? Iyanla Eleniyan looked out over the grave, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby trees. What I expect, Bisola, is loyalty. The kind of loyalty that goes beyond mere words. You've proven yourself capable, but now you need to prove yourself trustworthy. Alea City is a dangerous place, and with Chief gone, there are those who will try to take what's ours. I need to know that you will stand with me, that you will be the force I need to keep them at bay. Bisola nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Iyanla, you have my loyalty. I've come this far, and I'm not about to stop now. Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'm with you. She turned to him, a genuine smile breaking through her usually stern expression. Good, because we're just getting started, Bisola. The power you've tasted in Seattle, USA was just the beginning. Alea City is where the real game is played, and with you by my side, we're going to take control of this city and beyond. As they stood there side by side, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in twilight. In that moment, Bisola knew that his path had changed yet again. He was no longer just a man climbing the ladder of power. He was a key player in a much larger game, one that had been set in motion long before he'd ever realized. Iyanla Eleniyan was more than just a matron. She was the true power behind the throne, the woman who had shaped the man he had become. And now, with her at his side, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. Together, they would rule Alea City, and then Muguland, and woe to anyone who dared to stand in their way.
Born in the land of riches, gold, oil, diamond bright. But our streets are stained with blood, but the youth fight for their rights. Protesting for a future, yet they're slaughtered in the night. While the leaders sit in silence, flying private jets in flight. They drive their bulletproof cars while we walk these streets. Say there's no money, but their jets fly with ease. Our children starve, but they're too blind to see. Muguland, why can't we be free?